I didn't think twice when Kyle called me up that Saturday morning, asking for a favor. He just bought a new set of security cameras for his place and needed help installing them. It was the kind of thing we'd done for each other our whole lives, small favors without hesitation. Kyle and I had been best friends since middle school. We were inseparable through the awkward years, surviving bad haircuts, high school heartbreaks, and first jobs together. Even as adults, we stayed close. My wife, Lisa, always joked that she married both of us by default since Kyle was practically family. So when I told her I was heading over to Kyle's house to help with the cameras, she just nodded distractedly while scrolling on her phone. "Don't forget we're meeting Jen and Mark for dinner later," she reminded me without looking up. "I'll be back by 3, I promised, grabbing my toolkit and keys. Kyle lived about 10 minutes away in a newer neighborhood with cookie-cutter houses lined up like a suburban dream. His place was bigger than ours, with a sleek, modern design and a backyard that could host a small wedding. He'd done well for himself, running his own IT business. When I pulled into the driveway, Kyle was already outside, waving enthusiastically. He had that same boyish energy even in his 30s, tousled blonde hair, a wide grin, and a knack for making everyone around him feel like they were the center of the universe. "About time," he called as I got out of the truck. "You bring the tools?" "Of course, somebody's got to show you how to use a drill." He laughed, clapping me on the back. "Let's get to it, genius." The cameras were state-of-the-art, motion detection, night vision, the whole 9 yards. Kyle had bought enough to cover every corner of his house, inside and out. We started with the exterior, mounting one above the garage and another near the back patio. As we worked, Kyle filled the air with his usual chatter about work, his recent dating disasters, and a weekend fishing trip he wanted us to plan. It was easy, familiar. After a couple of hours, sweat slicked down my back, and my arms ached from holding up the drill. "Let's take a break," I suggested. Kyle grinned. "Beer? You know it." We headed inside where the air conditioning was a blessed relief. Kyle handed me a cold bottle, and we stood in his kitchen, drinking in comfortable silence. "You're good at this stuff," Kyle said after a minute. "Ever think about quitting your desk job and going full-time handyman?" I snorted. "Yeah, I'm sure Lisa would love that. Giving up a stable paycheck to crawl around under people's houses?" He shrugged. "Sometimes stable isn't all it's cracked up to be." I didn't think much of the comment at the time. Once we finished our beers, we got back to work on the interior cameras. The first went up in the living room, then one in the hallway near the bedrooms. The last camera was set to cover the front entryway, facing the stairs in the open concept living space. "Why so many cameras?" I asked, wiping sweat from my brow. "Expecting a break-in?" Kyle laughed. "Nah, just like being prepared. Plus, you never know what kind of stuff you'll catch on these things. Could be entertaining." I shook my head, amused, paranoid as ever. As we connected the cameras to his system, Kyle pulled up the live feeds on his laptop. The views were crystal clear, showing every angle of his house. "Pretty slick," I admitted. "Told you," he said proudly. We tested each camera, making sure the motion sensors triggered correctly. Everything seemed perfect, until Kyle frowned at the screen. "Hold up," he said, leaning closer. "What? Is that your truck?" I followed his gaze to the screen showing the driveway. Sure enough, my truck was parked there. But something else caught my eye. A familiar figure stepping out of a car that had just pulled in behind mine. It was Lisa. "What's she doing here?" I asked, confused. Kyle looked just as surprised. "No idea." I felt a weird twinge in my gut. Lisa hadn't mentioned coming by Kyle's place. Maybe she'd forgotten something she needed to tell me, or maybe she was planning a surprise. I tried to brush it off, but a nagging unease crept in. We watched as Lisa walked toward the front door, hesitating for a moment before ringing the bell. Kyle looked at me with a puzzled expression. "You want me to let her in?" Before I could answer, the feed switched as the motion sensor near the entryway picked up movement. The front door opened, and Kyle, live Kyle standing next to me, wasn't the one greeting my wife. I froze. It was recorded Kyle, from an earlier clip. Lisa had been here before, without me knowing. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen, watching Lisa step into Kyle's house on that recorded feed. The timestamp in the corner was from 2 days ago, a Thursday afternoon when I'd been stuck at the office for back-to-back meetings. Kyle must have noticed my reaction because he let out a nervous laugh. Weird glitch, huh? These things get buggy sometimes. But I wasn't buying it. I knew what I saw, and I knew my wife. Lisa had no reason to visit Kyle's house without telling me. What's she doing here on Thursday? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady even though my pulse was pounding in my ears. Kyle rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. I honestly have no idea, man. Maybe she wanted to drop something off, or I don't know. His words trailed off, unconvincing. Something felt off, and I couldn't shake it. Kyle was my best friend, the guy who'd been in my life longer than anyone outside of family. We'd been through everything together. School, heartbreaks, even my wedding to Lisa, where he'd stood proudly as my best man. The idea that he'd hide something from me was absurd, or at least it had been until now. I forced myself to play it cool, pushing down the growing knot of suspicion. Yeah, probably nothing, I muttered, though the words felt bitter on my tongue. We finished setting up the last camera in strained silence. The easy camaraderie we'd shared earlier was gone, replaced by a tension that neither of us acknowledged aloud. After testing the final feed, I packed up my tools and headed for the door. Kyle followed me, his usual chatter noticeably absent. "You sure everything's good?" he asked as I stepped onto the porch. "Yeah," I lied. "Thanks for the help, man. I owe you one." I nodded curtly, not trusting myself to say more. My truck door slammed harder than necessary as I climbed inside and started the engine. Kyle stood on his porch, watching me drive away, his expression unreadable. The short drive home gave me too much time to think. Every interaction between Lisa and Kyle over the years replayed in my mind like a highlight reel, each moment now tinged with doubt. Had I missed something? Were there signs I'd been too blind or too trusting to see? By the time I pulled into our driveway, my head was spinning. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, staring blankly at the garage door. Lisa's car was already parked inside. She was home, probably making dinner or helping the kids with homework, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Maybe there was an innocent explanation for everything. Maybe I was overreacting. But the gnawing feeling in my gut refused to go away. When I walked inside, the familiar scent of garlic and herbs filled the air. Lisa was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with practiced ease. She glanced up as I entered, flashing me a warm smile. "Hey, you're back earlier than I thought," she said cheerfully. "Yeah, finished faster than expected," I replied, forcing a casual tone. "How's Kyle?" "Fine." The word came out clipped, and Lisa frowned slightly but didn't press. I stood there for a moment, watching her. She looked so normal, her dark hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, a smear of flour on her cheek from whatever she was cooking. It was hard to reconcile this version of Lisa with the woman I'd just seen on Kyle's security footage. I saw something weird today," I said cautiously, testing the waters. "Oh?" She kept chopping, not looking up. "At Kyle's. You were on one of the camera feeds from Thursday." Her hand faltered slightly, the knife tapping against the cutting board. "Oh, that," she said with a nervous laugh. "I forgot to tell you. I stopped by to drop off those extra folding chairs we borrowed for the barbecue last month. He wasn't home, so I just left them by the garage." It was a reasonable explanation, except for one thing. Kyle had been home on Thursday. I knew that because he'd texted me about some problem with his Wi-Fi that morning. My mouth went dry. Lisa was lying. But why? I forced a smile, pretending to accept her story. "Makes sense," I said, even though nothing about this made sense anymore. As Lisa returned to chopping vegetables, humming softly under her breath, I felt the first real cracks form in the foundation of our marriage. The person I trusted most in the world was keeping secrets from me, and I was going to find out why. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake next to Lisa, listening to the even rhythm of her breathing as my mind churned through possibilities. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I'd imagined that hesitation in her voice when she explained her visit to Kyle's house. But deep down, I knew better. Lisa wasn't the kind of person to forget important details, and Kyle definitely wasn't the kind of guy who'd leave his best friend out of the loop unless something was going on. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the blinds, I decided I couldn't sit on my suspicions any longer. I needed answers. Lisa was already up, bustling around the kitchen, pouring cereal for the kids. "Morning," she said brightly as I walked in, her tone light and casual, like nothing was wrong. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. The kids chattered about their weekend plans while I sipped my coffee, nodding absent-mindedly to their stories. My mind wasn't in the room. It was back at Kyle's house, replaying that strange footage over and over again. After breakfast, Lisa kissed me on the cheek. "I'm heading to the store. Need anything?" "No, I'm good," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She grabbed her keys and waved goodbye to the kids before slipping out the door. I waited until I heard the car pull out of the driveway before making my move. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Kyle's contact, my thumb hovering over the call button. Confronting him directly felt risky. If something was going on, he'd just lie to cover his tracks. Instead, I decided to dig deeper myself. I remembered Kyle mentioning that the security system he installed came with cloud storage for recorded footage. If the cameras had been running on Thursday, there had to be more clips of Lisa's visit. The problem was I didn't have access to Kyle's system, but I knew someone who did. Kyle's job in IT made him paranoid about security, which meant he always shared backup access to his accounts with someone he trusted. In this case, me. It was an old habit from when we used to help each other troubleshoot tech issues, and I doubted he'd thought to change it. I opened my laptop and logged into Kyle's security account, my heart racing with a mix of guilt and determination. The interface was sleek and intuitive, showing a timeline of recorded events. I scrolled back to Thursday, my pulse quickening as I saw multiple clips marked throughout the afternoon. I clicked the first one, and the screen filled with a high-definition view of Kyle's front entryway. Lisa appeared a few seconds in, her hand resting nervously on the doorknob before Kyle opened the door. He greeted her with a smile, not the casual friendliness I was used to, but something warmer, more intimate. My stomach clenched as they exchanged a quick hug. Lisa's expression was tense, like she was nervous but determined. The clip ended, and I clicked on the next one, which showed them moving into the living room. Kyle said something I couldn't hear, and Lisa laughed softly, relaxing a bit. They sat down on the couch, their knees almost touching. I watched in stunned silence as Lisa leaned forward, her voice animated. Kyle listened intently, his expression softening. There was something unspoken between them, a tension I couldn't ignore. The clip cut off again, leaving me with more questions than answers. I wanted to believe it was innocent, a friendly conversation between two people who'd known each other for years, but the sinking feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I clicked through more footage, each clip showing fragments of their interaction. Lisa resting her hand on Kyle's arm, Kyle leaning in just a bit too close. Then came the final clip. Lisa stood up abruptly, her face flushed. Kyle followed, grabbing her hand to stop her from leaving. My breath caught in my throat as they stood there, frozen in a moment that felt like it stretched on forever. And then it happened. Lisa leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that shattered any illusions I had left. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was betrayal. Lisa, the woman I'd built my life with, had crossed a line with my best friend, the one person I'd trusted more than anyone else. I sat there in stunned silence, my mind struggling to process what I'd just seen. Every memory I had of our friendship, every moment of trust, felt tainted now. The sound of the front door opening snapped me out of my daze. Lisa was back from the store, her cheerful voice calling out to the kids. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This wasn't the time for a confrontation. I needed to think, to figure out my next move. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. I spent the rest of that day trapped inside my own head. The weight of what I'd seen on Kyle's security footage sat heavy in my chest, making it hard to breathe, let alone think clearly. Lisa went about her day as if everything was perfectly normal, helping the kids with their homework, folding laundry, humming along to some pop song playing in the background. I watched her closely, looking for cracks in her carefully constructed facade. How long had she been lying to me? How long had this thing with Kyle been going on? Every time she smiled at me, I felt like I was going to be sick. By the time evening rolled around, I knew I couldn't keep it bottled up any longer. I had to confront her, but I wasn't going to stumble into it blindly, fueled by anger and raw emotion. No, I needed control. If I let her spin the conversation, I'd end up doubting what I already knew to be true. Dinner was awkward. The kids chattered about school while Lisa served up plates of spaghetti, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I forced myself to eat, though every bite tasted like ash in my mouth. After the kids were tucked in for the night, Lisa poured herself a glass of wine and curled up on the couch with a book. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a long moment, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "You got a minute?" I asked, my voice strained but steady. She glanced up, her brow furrowing slightly. "Of course. What's up?" I walked over and sat down across from her, careful to keep my expression neutral. The last thing I wanted was to tip her off before I got what I needed. "There's something I need to ask you," I said carefully, "and I need you to be honest with me." Lisa set her book down, looking genuinely concerned now. "You're scaring me. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. "Were you at Kyle's house last Thursday?" Her face barely changed, but I saw it, the brief flicker of surprise, quickly masked by a forced smile. "I already told you," she said lightly. "I dropped off those chairs we borrowed for the barbecue." "Why?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "You sure about that?" Her smile faltered. "Yes, I'm sure. Why are you asking me this again?" I pulled out my phone and opened the photo I'd taken of Kyle's security footage. Lisa standing in Kyle's living room, her hand resting on his arm, both of them far too comfortable for my liking. Her face drained of color as she stared at the screen. "Care to explain this?" I asked quietly. Lisa opened her mouth, then closed it again, struggling to find the right words. "It's not what it looks like," she said finally, her voice shaky. "Then what is it?" I demanded, my composure slipping. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been sneaking around behind my back with my best friend." She flinched, guilt flickering across her face. "We didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. My stomach turned. "We didn't mean for it to happen." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "How long?" I asked through gritted teeth. Lisa looked down at her hands, tears welling in her eyes. "A few months," she admitted softly. A cold wave of fury washed over me. Months. They'd been carrying on behind my back for months. "And you weren't planning on telling me, were you?" I asked bitterly. "Were you just going to keep playing house with me while sneaking off to see Kyle?" "No," she said quickly. "It's over. I swear. I ended it weeks ago." I laughed harshly, the sound bitter and hollow. "Oh, weeks ago. Well, that makes everything better, doesn't it?" "I made a mistake," Lisa pleaded. "A terrible, awful mistake. But I love you. I never stopped loving you." I shook my head, disbelief coursing through me. "You call that love? Lying to me? Betraying me with the one person I trusted more than anyone else?" Tears streamed down her face now. "Please, let's talk about this. We can fix it. I know we can." I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in around me. "I need some air," I muttered. "Please don't walk away," she begged, reaching for me. I pulled back, my voice cold and flat. "You already did." Lisa sobbed as I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, slamming it shut behind me. The night air was crisp and biting against my skin, but it did nothing to numb the pain tearing through me. I stood on the porch, breathing heavily, trying to regain control of my thoughts. My marriage was in ruins, shattered by the two people I'd trusted most in the world. And as much as I wanted to believe Lisa's tears and promises, I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to forgive her or Kyle for what they'd done. I drove aimlessly that night, the weight of Lisa's betrayal pressing down on my chest like a stone. The hum of the tires on the pavement was the only sound, my thoughts too chaotic to even reach for the radio. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white as I replayed her tearful confession over and over. "We didn't mean for it to happen. I made a mistake. It's over." But it wasn't over for me. Not by a long shot. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, the neon sign flickering weakly in the dark. The place was mostly empty except for a couple of truckers hunched over their coffee cups and a waitress scrolling through her phone behind the counter. I slid into a booth by the window, ordering a black coffee I didn't even want. The bitterness of it matched the taste in my mouth. As I sat there staring blankly out at the empty street, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen. Lisa. The call went to voicemail, and almost immediately she texted, "Please come home. We need to talk." I shoved the phone into my pocket, my jaw tightening. I wasn't ready to go back. I wasn't ready to hear more excuses or apologies. But I knew I couldn't stay in that booth forever. Eventually, I paid for my untouched coffee and headed back to my truck, the weight in my chest heavier than before. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. The kids were probably asleep, blissfully unaware of the implosion happening between their parents. For their sake, I forced myself to take a steadying breath before walking inside. Lisa was waiting for me in the living room, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She stood up as soon as I entered, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I don't want to hear it right now," I said, my voice hoarse. "Please," she whispered, "just let me explain." "I think you've explained enough," I cut her off. "I saw the footage, Lisa. I know exactly what happened." Tears welled up in her eyes again, but I was too numb to care. I walked past her, heading straight for the stairs. "Where are you going?" she called after me. "To sleep," I said flatly. "Or at least try to." "You can't just shut me out," she pleaded. "We have to talk about this." "Not tonight," I said without looking back. I slept in the guest room that night, or at least I tried to. The bed was unfamiliar, the sheets stiff and cold. I tossed and turned, haunted by images of Lisa and Kyle together. When morning finally came, I got up without a word and left the house before anyone else was awake. I needed space, time to think without Lisa hovering over me, begging for forgiveness. I drove to the park where I used to take the kids when they were younger. The place was quiet now, the playground empty except for a couple of joggers passing by. I sat on one of the benches, my head in my hands. How had my life come to this? I thought back to my wedding day, the way Lisa had looked walking down the aisle, radiant and full of promise. Kyle had been there too, grinning like the proud best man he was. I'd trusted them both implicitly, never once imagining that they would betray me like this. The pain was raw and overwhelming, but beneath it all was a simmering rage. Not just at Lisa, but at Kyle too. He was supposed to be my brother in all but blood, the one person who had my back no matter what. And yet, he'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. My phone buzzed again, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Kyle this time. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. The audacity of it was almost laughable. Talk? What was there to talk about? He'd slept with my wife. The damage was done. But as much as I wanted to ignore him, I knew I couldn't. This wasn't just about Lisa anymore. It was about Kyle, too. I needed to confront him, to hear whatever pathetic excuse he had for destroying our friendship. I typed out a curt reply. "Meet me at the park, 30 minutes. He responded almost immediately. "Be there." The wait was agonizing. I paced back and forth by the bench, my fists clenching and unclenching at my sides. Part of me wanted to knock him out the moment he showed up, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. When Kyle finally arrived, he looked just as wrecked as Lisa had the night before. Dark circles under his eyes, his usually confident demeanor replaced by a nervous tension. "Hey," he said awkwardly, shoving his hands into his pockets. I didn't return the greeting. "Why?" I demanded bluntly. Kyle winced, looking down at the ground. "I messed up," he admitted. "I don't have an excuse for it. I was selfish, and I hurt you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm sorry." "Sorry?" I echoed bitterly. "You think sorry cuts it?" "You slept with my wife, Kyle. My wife." "I know," he said quietly, "and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." There was a long, heavy silence between us, broken only by the distant sound of birds chirping. "I trusted you," I said finally, my voice shaking. "You were my best friend. You were supposed to have my back, not stab me in it." Kyle swallowed hard, his face contorted with guilt. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know that it wasn't about hurting you. It was a mistake, and it's over." I swear I shook my head, disgusted. You don't get it, do you? You didn't just ruin our friendship. You ruined everything. Kyle opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. We're done, I said coldly. Stay away from me. Stay away from my family. He nodded miserably, knowing there was nothing left to say. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of finality settle over me. Kyle was out of my life for good, but the mess he and Lisa had made, that was still mine to deal with. The days that followed were a blur of tension and silence. Lisa tried multiple times to pull me into conversations, but I was a wall, unmoved, unresponsive. I hadn't left the house permanently yet, but emotionally I was already gone. Every smile she forced, every plea she whispered chipped away at whatever was left of my patience. Our home had become a battlefield with invisible lines neither of us dared to cross. The kids noticed, of course. They were smarter than we gave them credit for. They could feel the cold distance between their parents, but they were too young to fully understand why. Lisa clung to some desperate hope that time would heal the rifts, that if she just said the right things, we could go back to the way things were. But there was no going back, not after what she and Kyle had done. One afternoon, while the kids were out at a friend's house, Lisa cornered me in the kitchen. Jake, she said softly, her voice trembling. We need to talk. I didn't look up from my coffee. We've talked enough. No, we haven't, she insisted, stepping closer. You can't just shut me out forever. I set the mug down with a deliberate thud, meeting her tear-filled gaze. Why not? You didn't seem to care about me when you were sneaking around with Kyle. She flinched like I'd slapped her, but I didn't care. She deserved the sting. I've told you everything, she said quietly. It was a mistake, Jake. A horrible, awful mistake. I love you. I never stopped loving you. I laughed bitterly. Funny way of showing it. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted, her voice breaking. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just please don't give up on us. I stared at her for a long moment, the weight of her words pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the life we'd built together and pretend this was just a bump in the road. But another part, the part that had watched that footage of her and Kyle, that had heard her confession, knew better. You didn't just cheat on me, Lisa, I said quietly. You shattered everything we built together. Every memory, every promise. It's all tainted now, and I can't live with that. Tears streamed down her face, but I kept going. Do you even realize what you've done? You didn't just betray me, you betrayed our family. You blew up our entire life for what? A fling with my best friend? It wasn't like that, she sobbed. It wasn't just about him. I was lost, Jake. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter anymore. And Kyle, he was just there, and I made a horrible choice. Invisible, I echoed, my voice rising. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to provide for this family? To give you and the kids a good life? And you repay me by screwing my best friend? She shook her head frantically. No, that's not what I meant. I know you work hard. I appreciate everything you do. But somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing each other, Jake. We became strangers living under the same roof. I wanted to argue to tell her she was wrong, but deep down I knew there was some truth to her words. Life had a way of grinding people down, turning love into routine and passion into obligation. But that didn't excuse what she'd done. You could have talked to me, I said through clenched teeth. You could have told me how you were feeling. But instead, you chose to betray me with Kyle. And now here we are. Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I'm sorry, Lisa whispered. I know I can't undo what I did. But I love you, Jake. And I'm begging you. Please, let's try to fix this. I shook my head slowly. I don't think I can, I admitted, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Her sobs filled the room, but I couldn't comfort her. I was too broken, too raw to offer any solace. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, I packed a bag. Lisa watched from the doorway, her face pale and stricken. Where are you going? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. To clear my head, I said simply. For how long? I don't know, I admitted honestly. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. I'll wait for you, she said quietly. No matter how long it takes, I'll wait. I didn't respond. What was there to say? As I drove away from the house, my chest felt hollow. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me, suffocating and relentless. But I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I had to figure out who I was without Lisa and without Kyle, and maybe, just maybe, I'd find a way to heal.